what we do. I believe that we've assembled a really great group of experts on different issues to talk about the issues that are of concern to us, to Kentucky, and to its citizens. But first I want to introduce you to the person that provides the vision for me and behind the person that's the vision behind the activities that we undertake in the Energy and Environment Cabinet. Governor Matt Bevin is Kentucky's 62nd governor. I've been around him a lot. He is a believer in the American dream. He spent his time as governor trying to offer opportunity for all the people in Kentucky, whether they're unemployed, whether they're drug addicted, whether they're in prison, or whether they're in foster care. And I've seen him work in all of these different venues. And the governor works hard to make government more responsible, more accountable, and to live up to the promises that we make to the public. Under his leadership, Kentucky has added 47,000 new jobs in the last 3 years and $17 billion in new investment in businesses. He's challenged all of us to reduce red tape, which is why we wear these pins. And that's resulted in the elimination or the amendment of over 300 regulations just in this cabinet without any increased risk to the public or to the environment. So I'm proud and pleased to be able to introduce to you our Governor, Matt Bevin.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your patience. We can eliminate red tape. We can't eliminate traffic congestion, unfortunately. But thank you for being here. Truly, I think it was probably just about exactly a year ago when I addressed you all and shared with you my vision for the Commonwealth. I'll touch on that again briefly, but I want to thank you for being here. This is a dynamic time in the industry. It really is. And I'm expected to give you a keynote of sorts. I don't know that I have one in its entirety. I'll touch on a couple of things. And if time allows it and it's okay, I'd be happy to take a couple questions. Would that be due? Because sometimes these things are best when what we talk about are things that matter the most to you, or you get from my perspective my thoughts on X, Y, or Z. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time. I do have a heart for many. It isn't just those in adoption in foster care situations or recovering from addiction or those that are incarcerated. It's also people in the energy industry as well. So it's people all across the spectrum, those employed, unemployed, and otherwise. We're all in this boat together. And indeed, our state motto is as true as it has ever been, which is that united we stand and divided we fall. And that's true. I mean, the same relates to policies that affect every single citizen of Kentucky that are certainly driven by the conversations you're going to be having at this conference. It's interesting, you know this. I don't need to give you all the stats and figures because you're in the industry where you know this. But ironically, we, as energy sources have begun to expand, we see a less and less demand because we've become more efficient in a variety of things, not the least of which is just how much more efficient an LED light is relative to other alternatives and what an impact that has just on the retail end of things, on the end user, the private individual user of electricity. So we have tons of electricity, we have plenty of it, we have capacity. Where are we going to get people to utilize it? We'll touch on that just briefly. But my vision, again, I'll reiterate, I said this last year, I won't take you through the entire thing other than to say that the summation of it is that I want Kentucky to be the absolute center of excellence for engineering and manufacturing. That there is no state anywhere in America that a generation from now, and hopefully sooner, will be more synonymous with, more well-known for, and more able to be the absolute proof statement for engineering and manufacturing excellence. And the entire supply chain of that production of things, and it won't be just widgets, maybe advanced things like automobiles and airplanes and aerospace-related components. It may be pharmaceuticals and medical devices. It may be petrochemicals. But the point is engineering and manufacturing any number of things, especially those that are in the metals-based world. That whole ecosystem, that whole supply chain is one that is a big user of electricity and of energy itself. And so the sources of that and the ways in which we provide it are going to be critical for us to accomplish our vision. And the vision is a simple one. It's utterly attainable. We're already doing it, as we talked about last year, in some measure. But by keeping our foot on the gas, by simplifying things, cutting red tape, simplifying the processes whereby we do things, we're going to be able to accomplish this as quickly as possible. But the thing that, to me, it's not just a function of making things. I don't want to simply just have the automobile manufacturers, for example. I want to have the people who, all the way down to whether we're smelting it, forging it, casting it, recycling it. I want the actual metals production in this state. Some of you may be aware of this, but as of right now, so much of the fabrication world, big users of electricity, people who produce metals, all of the fabrication is increasingly moving to different alloys, lighter weight alloys, aluminum alloys, as they've gotten stronger and better and continue to be lightweight are more and more in demand. There's not nearly enough supply of that product, aluminum sheet, as there is demand in the world and in this country. But perhaps you know, perhaps you don't, but 40% of all the aluminum sheet currently made in the United States of America is already made in Kentucky. 40% of it. That's going to increase as people like Castellium are investing hundreds of millions of more dollars. Brady Industries putting another $1.5 billion new aluminum rolling mill online. As people like, Novelis looking to acquire Alaris and pour into that. These kind of things are going to, in short measure, have us at north of 50% in climbing. We see companies like Nucor investing another $650 million into their production facilities. We see Century Aluminum just today putting a whole new line back on at their smelter down in Hawesville. These people are huge consumers of the very thing that is generated by those of you in this room and the companies that you work for. Huge consumers. This is part of that ecosystem. This is part of that supply chain. This is really what I want to see happen. So I have been very intentional in my conversations in this country and outside of this country as I talk to people. We're talking to other people that are looking to potentially do multi-billion-dollar projects in this state. 2 of them that are multi-billion-dollar projects, both of which would be massive consumers of energy. They may not happen. They may not even come to the United States. They may not come to Kentucky if they do, but you can bet we are working on that. I've shared with people, and it is something I live by. Abraham Lincoln, a famous son of Kentucky, famous for saying many things, but one of the things he said is that good things may come to those who wait, but only the things left behind by those who hustle. And I will tell you, there is nobody hustling more than Kentucky is to go out and find the people who are looking for something in North America, looking for something in the United States, and whether they know it yet or not, looking for something in Kentucky. And our job is to make sure they understand that that is possible. And the fact that we right now have the cheapest energy rates east of the Mississippi is a tremendous advantage for us. At the end of the day, we want electricity that fills several fold. We want it to be reliable. We want it to be consistent and available. We want it to be affordable. All these things that you work on, these are advantages that we offer already, but we want that to continue to be the case, not only relative to where we've been, but relative to states around us. This is a tremendous competitive advantage of ours. I just recently took the chairmanship of the Southern States Energy Board, SSEB. A number of you have perhaps attended these conferences and are perhaps associated with that in some way. You certainly are, directly or indirectly. And the things that I intend to focus on are several fold, some that are obvious. Talking about the electrification of vehicles and, in fact, being more supportive of this. I mean, this energy that is needed for these is going to be produced by the very companies that you represent and or service and or are connected with in some way. And it's coming whether we want it to or not. It may not come at the same pace that some would have us believe or hope it to be. Some of the early movers may not be the successful ones, but it is coming. There is a move toward the electrification of vehicles that's going to be significant. It's going to happen in remarkable fashion in our lifetimes and frankly, even in the next 3, 5, 10 years. So what are we doing as a region? What are we doing as an industry to be prepared for that? and to make sure that we are actually a seat at the table in making sure that it unfolds in ways that is good for the energy business. Cybersecurity, critical, absolutely critical. I won't go through the whole list of things that I intend to focus on in the year ahead, but the security of our energy grid, critical. And truth be told, we don't know the half of what our insecurities are. We're blessed to have recently hired a fellow who had retired. He was a professor at the Army War College. He's now the head of technology for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. But while he was a tenured faculty professor, Dr. Grindle was teaching cybersecurity to generals. He, during the Gulf War, ran the entire Third Army network out of Qatar. This is a guy with a lot of experience and knowledge, and what he tells me scares me, is that truth be told, none of it is very secure. None of it. If people truly wanted to be a bad actor with very little ability to stop them, they could be. The key is, are we doing enough? What more can we do? How intentional and proactive can we be, not only from within and the ways in which we communicate among our employees, the importance of just basic desktop type security, and who does and doesn't have access to what, but also just from a network standpoint as well. These are the kind of things we're focusing on, not only as it relates to the energy sector, but frankly across the Commonwealth. These are things that are going to be topics of conversation. I also, as I was assuming chairmanship at our last meeting, in advance of the first one that I'll actually chair, I said, what I want to do is for the members of the SSEB, I want to hear from them. And so I asked each of them to please send their top 3 or 5 topics they would like to see discussed. I asked each of them to send those independently to those administrators and folks that are handling the day-to-day work at the SSEB. And what I want to do is say if 10 people here, 10 people there, and 10 people there each sent in their top 3 or 5 concerns and issues that they thought that board should focus on in a year, if I find on those 30 things that come in the same issue in every single person's top 3 or 5, and it wasn't on my radar screen, guess what should be on my radar screen? Guess what should be on the SSEB's radar screen, and Kentucky's, and every other state? So much of this needs to be driven from the bottom up. I'm grateful for the fact that this is a new day and age as it relates to dealing with the EPA. And I think we have members of the EPA here, representatives of the administrator. Thank you. I don't know where you are, but thank you for being here. Where are you? Maybe you're not here. Over here. Outstanding. Thank you. Truly grateful to you. How fortunate we were to have Scott Pruitt during the time that he was there, a native son of Kentucky, a guy who did a remarkable job of returning back to a more federalist approach to the state-level control, the very things that should never have been assumed at the national level. And now Administrator Wheeler taking the same ball and running with it. Good things happening. Thank you for being a point person for that. Thank you for realizing that we are your allies and you are our ally as opposed to adversaries one with another. Thank you for working with us as an organization, as an administration, on things like brownfield endeavors. I would submit, and maybe I'm biased, Kentucky is as good as anyone in America on this front. And in large measure because of the incredible collaboration we have with EPA at various levels, this region specifically at the national level, etc. Any and all ideas that you have, I would submit to you, just as I did ask of the SSEB board and members and affiliates to submit their ideas. I would ask you, what are your ideas? What are things that we need to be doing, can be doing, could be doing more of? Please, during the course of this conference, let those ideas flow up. If there's a way to collect those, Secretary Snavely, I would ask you maybe to ask everybody in this room, what are the top 3 things you'd like to see? Maybe we could give you all a note card, and you just literally write, what are your top 3 issues that we should be talking about over the next 12 months so that when we meet again a year from now, we've made progress on? I'd love to know. And if we could gather all that information, you put that together, let's put it in a spreadsheet, see which ideas bubble to the top, which are the 3 most common ideas, and we'll make sure that between now and 12 months from now, we are chopping wood and getting this done. This is how you get things done. This is what the EPA has been doing in remarkable ways, and we're grateful for it. It's what this state has been attempting to do, and I'm grateful for people like Charles Snavely and his team who've been making great strides on this front. Again, I could go into a whole lot of other specific details, but let me stop there and say, are there any specific questions that any of you have of me or thoughts? And if I can hear your question, and I almost certainly will be able to, I'll repeat it so that there is a microphone, but if you happen to be over here, just raise your hand. I'll call on you. If the mic gets to you, great. Otherwise, I'll repeat your question. Anybody at all with a question? You have to raise your hand high because I can't really see you up here with these lights on. Yes, sir.
With the changing landscape in both...
And Tim, maybe you could just tell us who you are.
Tim Gibbs, I'm the president of the Ashland Alliance. Kentucky has historically had a huge advantage in power rates. With regulation and with the movement in certain directions, I'm wondering if there's a way that if we could work to keep that advantage, to not suddenly be a commodity where we had an advantage in the past.
This, again, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's a great question. It's the $64,000 question or $64 million or $64 billion question, depending on the scale to which you take it. One of the reasons we have been able to attract $17 billion in private capital invested in the state in the last 2 3/4 years, which shatters, the best year we'd ever had in a single year was $5.1 billion of private capital invested in our state in a single year. Last year was 9.2. This year, it's on track to potentially be the second best year we've ever had. We're setting phenomenal records in some large measure because many of these people are coming here for our affordable energy rates. It is an advantage we had, but let's be honest, why have we had this advantage? For the same reason that 80% of the electricity in this room is still powered by a resource that we sit on top of many, many decades, arguably hundreds of years worth of supply. And we used to pull it right out of the ground, convert it into cheap, affordable, and remarkably reliable energy right above the point we pulled it out of the ground. And that's coal. The energy landscape is changing. I said I'm not going to go through every single thing that I intend to discuss next year at the SSEB, but one of those is something that all of us have heard, many of us have said, is that we're all for an all-the-above type approach. But all the above really needs to mean all the above. Not all the above means not that stuff, but some new thing that's only going to be justified by subsidizing it with other people's money. I'm not a big proponent personally of things that only cash flow themselves when subsidized because they can't cash flow themselves based on their own. And so how do we keep this competitive advantage? We make sure that all the above is that, and that coal, which as I mentioned literally from this stage last year, and it may have been in this exact room, I don't remember. You look kind of familiar to me. But I will say this, one of the things that I said is that yes, the energy landscape is changing, and yes, that the future is going to be different than it is now, and it's certainly different than it was even 10 years ago. But the bridge from where we are to where we're going is going to be built out of coal. It just is. There is no way to maintain the rate of electricity, the rates at which we pay, the consistency, if we don't use coal. It's going to be an integral part, not just in this region, but nationally and globally for decades to come. Exactly in what form or fashion will be determined. But if in this state, and I've challenged Charles with this, Secretary Snavely, we've had a lot of conversations about this. This is a passion of mine. If we sit literally on top of 100+ years worth of supply of something that if we pull it up out of the ground and convert it into energy right there, why would we not do everything in our power, all pun intended, to incentivize that process? Why should we not? If we are going to subsidize anybody anywhere, why don't we subsidize the very things that keep dollars in our communities, avail ourselves of a resource that we have in abundance, not to the extent that it comes at the, again, if it doesn't justify itself, so be it. But I'm telling you, then those dollars also stay in a community because people who pull these things out of the ground are the very people who are spending those dollars. They're educating their children in those communities, buying homes, eating out, living their versions of the American dream. It takes intentionality. If we just react, again, we have a fresh breath of air. I don't care what your perspective on the energy landscape. Where we are now compared to the previous administration in Washington is night and day, and it's good. If you happened to have been in a facet of the industry that was only existing based on generous hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies of other people's money, then this isn't as good for you as it was. But that was unsustainable, it was inappropriate, it should have never happened, and it shouldn't going forward, and this administration gets that. And now removing the encumbrances of bureaucracy and of regulation that serves no purpose, returning more control, as we said, back to the states, giving more ability for states to take advantage of things that we have, each of us individually. These are things we have to do. It's what Kentucky needs to do. I'm all for energy. I'm all for solar energy, wind energy, hydro energy, gas, coal. I genuinely am agnostic on this. I don't care. But what I want it to be is something where there's the best ROI possible. And if we sit on top of one of the above, literally, and we know how to turn it into energy, you look at energy, we're exporting 4, 5, 6 times as much coal as we were just a couple of years ago. The rest of the world wants it. Why are we quick to give it away? Maybe we have enough to do it, but we sure have enough to use ourselves. So I think the key is to be intentional, Tim. It's a good question. It's not easily answered by we're going to do X, Y, or Z. It's just that we're not going to assume that there is no future for the very things that have allowed us to be the most competitive state east of the Mississippi. The only reason we have the lowest energy rates is because we still produce as much of them with an abundance of material that we sit right on top of. That's it. That's literally. And the more we get away from that, the less competitive we're going to be at this point in time. There's other variables as well. But that's really why we have this competitive advantage even now. Other questions on anything? Yes, sir.
Talk about cybersecurity with the grid and like EV vehicles. How come we aren't investing more of our money in modernizing the grid? We could add EV charging stations, make it more secure to cyber attacks, just simply put power lines underground, and that'd make it more reliable to like storm damage, things like that.
The question is, well, first of all, I love your confidence in my ability to make that happen. I wish I did. I said to someone the other day, and the question was, given the focus on cyber and given the changing energy landscape, why not more investment in everything from EV charging stations to burying of electric lines to make them more impervious to storm damage and things of this sort? I said to someone the other day, I said, boy, I wish I could be the governor and the legislature for like 1 week. And someone said to me back, they said, oh, so you want to be the king? And I said, yeah, for 1 week, for 1 week. And so if that were the case, these are the kind of things that we would be able to start to do. Interestingly, on that first part of it, your points are well taken. These things have to happen. They are starting to happen. These things have to be driven by legislative process and allocations of monies, but they're also driven by policies and priorities from my seat and from others as well in this cabinet, and it's coming. We're about to receive a number of dollars from the Volkswagen settlement. You've probably heard of it. Others have as well. There's certain things that are expected of that. Many of them are very much in line with some of the things you've just said, specifically as it relates to the electrification of certain fleets of vehicles or what have you. It's coming. It really is. And again, let's start where it makes sense, where there's the best use. I'd love to see, there's no reason why you should not be able to take an electrical vehicle from here to northern Kentucky to Louisville and back again and not be able to be fully able to keep that thing charged all day long. I mean, literally, there should be multiple places. Now, that's the golden triangle. And for some of you that are not in that golden triangle, you say, there they go again. It's always in that area. But guess what? That's where most of the vehicles are. That's where most of the use is. It also just happens geographically currently to keep about pace with the range of the typical vehicles. But guess what? That range is going to keep increasing. Efficiency is going to keep getting better. And then we can build out from that center. But it's coming. It really is. And I've made it clear, and Secretary Snavely will tell you that. These are things that I have been very much a proponent of. We have to be thinking forward, not just backwards, but don't negate the fact that we've got things that already are in our hip pocket that we don't have to think are no longer of value just because we're pursuing things that are new and cutting edge. So these things are coming, and I think you'll see it. But I would also encourage all of you to speak with your legislators. We have a number of them here, I think, or they'll be here, maybe even on a panel following me. Are there any legislators here in the room now? Okay, they're all over here. Excellent. Yeah, thank you, guys. Some of these guys are the ones that I think you're going to be on a panel. coming up, perfect. Ask that same question, because these are the kind of things that are going to be driven in that way up through the legislative process. Other questions? Yes, sir. I'll repeat your question.
It's obvious to me that you're very passionate about manufacturing and industry and jobs, things of that nature. But Governor Bevin, something that I would want to hear about you personally, and as somebody that works with the Department for Environmental Protection, is what drives you whenever you get out of the bed in the morning? What's your goal as far as protecting an environment? There's keeping the air clean, the water clean, maybe setting aside public lands, maybe outdoor recreation. There's a lot of different things that we do as a department to not only protect us as humans, but also protect the environment as well, whether it be flora or fauna,
Sure.
just nature in general. And I think it's a wonderful thing. We're stewards of God's nature.
Yeah.
We really are. Just as an example, I love the biodiversity in Kentucky. I really do. I go to places like Red River Gorge often, and I see all the different types of animals down there, insects and bugs. And that is something that drives me every day when I come to work. So I just wanted to hear what's special to you.
Sure. I mean, understand this. How many of you in this room have children or grandchildren, or both? Most of y'all. I mean, the reality is, this is what drives me. I'm halfway through. I'm playing on the back nine at this point, pretty much without any question. Once you're in your second half century, you're on the downside. It's my children. It's their children. It's what does their future look like? That's what drives me. Think about this. We are absolutely responsible for being good stewards of the earth and of everything else that we've been given responsibility for within our own immediate families and communities. For those of us that were born in the 50s, 60s, you remember what it was like before an EPA existed. But the EPA it serves a purpose, but it has become a bit of an environmental, sort of a regulatory Frankenstein a bit. It was begun with good intentions and maybe got a little bit beyond its scope. It isn't to say that the cause wasn't just or that it isn't still worthy. But when I was a boy growing up, we had rivers catching on fire in places like, Ohio, very famously in the minds of many. I happened to be in a part of the country that did a lot of paper production. And there was a lot less mindfulness about what went into rivers, not just from that industry, but many others as well. We used to laugh at people who came up and swam in the river near where I grew up because we knew they weren't from around there. We knew they were from Massachusetts, actually, literally, and they always were. They're like, what a beautiful river. We're like, wow, just keep your mouth shut. But my point being, these places are now beautiful. The irony is this: as we've become more productive and more effective, we've done it by being better and better stewards. We are mindful of things that we never used to be. We're more intentional about them in ways that we weren't. But the irony is now we're pioneering some of the greatest technologies in the world. But in large measure due to bad policies that have come from previous administrations at the federal level, we've handcuffed ourselves from being able to utilize things that actually make our lives better, more efficient. There's not one person I know, the reason I ask people to raise their hands, there's not one person I know who has a child or a grandchild that doesn't want clean water or clean air. Frankly, you don't even need to have children to want these things. You don't. You need to be able to go out to a Red River Gorge and look around you and you appreciate why these things matter. I grew up in the woods. I grew up in a town the county I grew up in northern New Hampshire near the Canadian border in the middle of the woods. I have members of my family. One of my brothers is a forester, has lived in the woods and experienced the things you're talking about his whole life. But it's interesting, the county that I grew up in was 2.5 times the size of Pike County, which is our largest county and a pretty good sized one. It was 2.5 size the physical size of Pike County, but had half as many people in it. Very rural. Very much what you just described. This is near and dear to me. These are the kind of things that motivate me to be a good steward of this, to make sure that we leave the earth in our utilization of it in better shape, but not to use that as a reason not to continue to make forward progress, because it is the things we take for granted like the ability to flip the switch and have exactly the temperature in here and the amount of lighting that we want, the projection of just the right things at just the right times. It isn't one or the other. It's not a zero-sum game. It's how do we advance both simultaneously. And there is no nation on earth that has ever done it to this degree. And I hear people, and I will digress a bit, but it's based on your question. I hear people rail against the United States about how inappropriate we are and what not good stewards we are of the earth when we won't sign on to things like the Paris Agreement. But how many of you remember back, I guess it was the late 80s, at this point maybe 1990, somewhere, whenever the Kyoto Accord was, 89, 90, when was that, sometime around then? How many of you remember the Kyoto Accords? You remember that conversation? If you were in this industry, you remember it being a topic of conversation. The United States wasn't party to that either. Many, many dozens of nations signed on, and they all looked down their noses with scorn at the United States, who wouldn't be party to this. In the decades that have unfolded since that time, you go back and you look at what it was that people aspired to, the degrees of emissions, the degrees of consumption, the degrees of whatever the case might was that they measured and said our goal should be X, Y, and Z. Not one of the nations, not one that was party to the Kyoto Accords, the Kyoto Accord, met those objectives, not one of them. The only nation in the world that did was the one that didn't sign on, the United States. Same thing with the nonsense coming out of Paris. And I'm sure some will be offended at the idea that I would use that term. These things aren't intended to truly be better stewards. They're intended to be economic tools used by some to the disadvantage of others. That's it, straight up. I'd be hard-pressed for anybody to convince me otherwise. I'm grateful for the fact that this president understands that. It isn't to say that we're not going to take that seriously. I'm willing to bet you go forward 20 years into the future, there'll be once again probably one nation that will have met what the Paris Accord said that they wanted to meet in terms of all the above, and it will be the United States. We're the only nation on earth that truly, truly does more than give lip service to this. Do we do it perfectly? Of course not. Is it possible to do it perfectly? It's not. But do we do it with a greater sense of urgency, intentionality, and ultimately positive effect than anyone else on earth? Both now and throughout the course of history? Yes. And I'm confident we'll continue to. And this is really what people at the EPA, among others, are focused on making sure happens. But how many of you, for example, if you have more rules and regulations and all kinds of things that are going to make it happen, less likelihood that it will. You get these accords, they look good. Everybody goes away, pats themselves on the back and feels good. Look what we did. How many of you have ever worked at a firm where it was everyone's job at the company to answer the phone? A few of you. Who answered the phone? Nobody. Seriously. If it's everybody's job, nobody does it. Sometimes the key is just do stuff. Make it, assign certain responsibilities. And that includes what a nation does as it relates to its own backyard. Not giving itself the illusion that it's doing more by aspiring to things that it never intends to do, but doing it in agreement with other people who are going to also not do it. It's my 2 cents worth on that, but I do think we have a responsibility. I think we're doing a good job of it. We have cleaner air, cleaner water than we've ever had in the lifetimes of anybody that's here in this country. And the irony is this, you go to Europe right now. What are they doing in terms of their energy production? They're building new coal-fired power plants. We look to Europe as the green, forward, sustainable, energy of the future, and indeed much to be learned there. But the irony is this, they're building coal-fired power plants. Why? Because they need safe, reliable, affordable energy. The same thing we talked about earlier. And in 2015, when they had a brutally hard winter, and they had rolling brownouts, and you had major producers of automobiles and other things coming out of there and other manufacturing equipment, and they couldn't even get the energy needed to keep their plants operational, that became a bit of a wake-up call to people, is that you have to balance the two. And that's all we're asking for. Again, there is no perfect way to do it. There just isn't. And there are people in this room who represent all facets of the entire continuum of energy production and consumption and distribution. You represent every corner. And if we find the right balance, no one person in this room will think it's perfect if we have the right balance. Because there is no perfect. And everybody will give something and get something, but we can continue to strive forward, continue to make progress. That's all we're trying to do. And not let the government, any regulatory agency, be the enemy of forward progress and of the people. nor allow the people in any industry to be able to take advantage of others as well, or to bypass regulation that exists for these purposes. These are the things that we need to do in conjunction with one another, which again, I'll reiterate one final time, why I'm so grateful to this modern EPA. Because there has never, in our lifetimes, been a more collaborative effort. There really has not been. I wrote a paper when I was in grad school more than 25 years ago. I was an officer in the Army at the time. And I wrote a paper, the title of which was what I alluded to earlier. The title was The Environmental Protection Agency, a Regulatory Frankenstein. And the irony is I wrote that back then. I wasn't even in the energy space. I actually was the environmental control officer for a major military installation. So these things were in my mind, and I started looking at, again, the intention and the reality are sometimes not the same. They start in a way, they end in a very different way. They become counterproductive. Our job is to balance these things. Other questions, thoughts? Yes, sir.
I mean, nobody really talks about that. It's coal, it's natural gas, that sort of thing. What's your administration trying to do to increase that? Anything?
Tell me the first part of it. You're talking about ethanol, but I missed the very first.
Ethanol and biodiesel. I mean, what's the administration trying to do to increase that production, that sort of thing? You know, facilities and that sort of thing.
I mean, it goes back to what I said earlier. For me, if it cash flows itself and justifies itself, great. But if I have to subsidize someone to raise a product that an engine wasn't even designed to consume, in order to modify the product that it was designed to consume in order to consume it, and I'm subsidizing someone to grow a product to turn a food into a fuel, and it's less efficient, and it costs me more, am I helping the process? Really? I don't know. It's a question. These are the questions that I ask, though, the questions I ask of people in my administration and on my team. Questions I hope people ask at the federal level. I'm not personally advocating for more of that. I want the market to drive that. What's one thing that, to my knowledge, certainly in this country, and I don't know that even in North America, has never gotten any kind of a subsidy? I may be wrong, and correct me if I am, but at least by comparison to most energy sources, hydropower never gets subsidized. Why? Because it's remarkably cheap and efficient right out of the gate. Doesn't need other people's money to justify its existence. I don't mean to pick on wind power because it does have some potential, but I'll tell you this. We've spent hundreds of billions of dollars in North America in recent years of other people's money, putting things up, usually in rural communities where they're grateful to have the property tax associated with some new thing being built. And I've seen it firsthand in communities, including ones near where I grew up, and people are grateful for the tax revenue. And these things get put in at great expense. They're impressive to behold. Very rarely, if ever, do they deliver on the promise of what they're expected to generate. They create a whole lot of additional things that may not have been thought of, not the least of which is migratory issues for birds and things of that sort. But all that aside, what's going to happen in 10, 20, 30 years when the life cycle of these is gone and the subsidies are gone? These very communities in which they are now happy for the tax revenue are going to have 300-foot piles of rusted junk and massive environmental issues, and there'll be no money to take care of it. Again, we need to think long term. So as it relates to, again, energy is changing. It is. The fact that we can turn corn into something that our cars will run on is remarkable. Biodiesel is much more interesting to me because we are learning more and more and more, and there are powerful and affordable and efficient ways that we can take a variety of waste products and turn them into biodiesel. No question. But it's not something, again, that the state is necessarily thinking we're going to solve the next code on. We do have a number of research facilities in this state, including some that the state has invested in heavily as it relates to grain research. And while this wasn't specifically the thing that I think people had in mind, it was more on the production end. There are things that people think about as they look at the entire life cycle of grain and of other bioproducts that will involve things like what you do on the back end and how you utilize it for energy purposes. And this administration, these legislators have done a good job of making sure there is funding on things like this. But the state is not looking to subsidize being a front runner on things that I'm not convinced necessarily will be a good use of the limited taxpayer monies that we have. Trying to get industry. The question is more interested, are there efforts being made to get industries like this in here? Yes, I'll tell you where actually the most effort is being made, because this is what's coming in light of everything we've talked about, including these questions. Energy storage, battery production. That is what more than anything else we're going to talk about during these next days that you're here. More than anything else. Maybe it's just today. I don't know how long this whole thing goes. Energy storage, the capacity to store the energy we create, to be able to transport it, to use it on demand, to not lose it. These things are going to transform the world of energy more than anything else we're going to talk about. And so what I'm focusing a lot of my time and energy on, both domestically and around the world, pulling companies from overseas, pulling companies from other foreign countries like California, one of which, Enerblue, is headquartered now here in this town, building a production facility down in eastern Kentucky in Pikeville. What we're doing is attracting people that are going to build that 21st century storage capability. And it isn't just lithium ion, it's lithium titanate and 1,000 other iterations of things that are changing the world as we know it, and it will have meaningful impact. It'll have powerful impact. Just think about this just from a purely defense standpoint. I'm a former military guy, a number of you are probably as well. You know how many people we lose in the Middle East and in other engagements around the world who are killed by IEDs when they're simply trying to make fuel runs? Many. Probably a majority. I don't know that for a fact, but a remarkable percentage of the people that are killed are not killed in combat. They're killed trying to get energy from one place to another. It's tragic to me. How fantastic for that one arena alone, let alone to the extent that it then gets down into our day-to-day lives, that we would be able to have the ability to store things on command and to be able to draw from that, to be able to put things into the grid and out in ways that we can't even imagine right now. And battery technology is one of the ways, and we are, through economic development, working hard and intentionally to find those companies. I want them here. It goes back to my vision of being the absolute center of engineering and manufacturing excellence. If we make the metals and we make the energies that's going to power what those metals are turned into, and we make them all right here in Kentucky, and we're the epicenter of the state, the states geographically, and we have the logistical capabilities to get these goods to market through rail and air and waterways, the likes of which nobody else has. We will be that energy center. We will be that engineering and manufacturing center. We will be that metal production center, because they're all connected. They're all connected. But if I get the raw base materials, and those are the people I'm trying to get, they'll continue to then attract each other. And ultimately, the best new technologies will want to be here. The Conf Prize is given out every year at the University of Louisville. It's the most esteemed prize for energy storage that's given in the world. I may be wrong. I think it's a $50,000 prize that they give each year, and it's a competitive prize. And it's specifically on this same front. So I want those great thinkers coming. But I want them to come because their idea is going to justify its own fruition, and not that it will have to be subsidized necessarily. And you have clarified that wasn't your point, so I appreciate that. I think time is up. If there's any final question, I'll address it real quick. But if not, I will let you get back to your appointed rounds. Thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thanks for caring about this. Use this time to collaborate. Use this time to meet someone you haven't met. Talk to somebody who is in the same facet of the energy landscape as yourselves, but talk to people that are not. Take advantage of checking out the booths out here and talking to people. Really, we have people who've taken the time to set up, to have information to share. Take a few moments, to interact with them and understand this is a state that has so much upside potential to be a thought leader, a production leader, an energy leader on any number of fronts. We already are in some measure, but only to a fraction of the degree that we have the potential. So let's get out there and make it happen. I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. Thanks.
So we're a little bit behind schedule, but we've had a little bit of delay in some people getting here for our legislative panel, so just be cool. We're going to get through it all, and we're not going to worry about it. Next, I'd like to switch and talk a little bit about water, and I'm glad to introduce to you David Ross, who's the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Washington. David has over 20 years of experience in working on water issues, specifically in both state government and in the private sector. He's an attorney. He has a educational background in environmental law and has wide-ranging experience in the field. He's been in the consulting business, providing services to the city of San Diego. He's practiced with an international law firm in the area of land and natural resource law in Washington. And he's worked in 2 different states at the state level. He's been served in the Wyoming Attorney General's office, representing the Wyoming DEQ and specifically their water division. And he's directed the Environmental Protection Unit at the Department of Justice in the state of Wisconsin. So he is part of the team that's collaborated with us, the governor mentioned it a couple of times, on several of these important issues that we face in Kentucky. So I welcome you, Dave, to our conference and to Kentucky, and we appreciate you being here. David Ross.
Well, thank you, Charles, for that introduction. And so when I accepted this appointment, a wise person told me to never accept a speaking engagement behind the most dynamic speaker on the agenda. And whoops. That was fantastic. If I was smart, I would say I agree with everything the governor said. Take questions and sit down. Because I really do agree with his vision on the environment and the economy, the intersection with energy development, fixing the relationship with the federal government. So I wholeheartedly agree with everything he said. So any questions, and I'll see you guys later. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank the governor for his leadership in convening this conference. To see the word energy development and environmental protection and economic development on the same agenda in the same conference is, I'm thrilled with that convergence. They are not mutually exclusive concepts. In fact, they're interdependent. So to have this conference, I think, is important. To have this dialogue is important. I received a letter fairly recently from an organization that was trying to convince me, as we're going through and implementing the president's regulatory agenda, to think about Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt is back in vogue. You hear a lot of people talking about Teddy Roosevelt, Secretary Zinke, others. But the letter reminded me that Teddy Roosevelt really thought about conserving resources for future generations, and they were right. But actually, one of my favorite landmarks or monuments in Washington, D.C. is Roosevelt Island. It's across the river. It's actually in Virginia. But this really cool island that you can take a walk right on the Potomac River, a mile or 2 loop. But right in the middle of it is a monument to Teddy Roosevelt. It's a little, almost Stalin-esque, like Mother Russia. It's weird. It's this, kind of concrete slab in the middle of this beautiful island. Big iron statue of the former president. And they have these slabs of some of his famous quotes. And he's got one on nature, and a lot of the quotes that you hear all the time about conserving resources for future generations is there. But the last quote on there, it says, conservation means development as much as it does protection. And that is a lost quote. But he was spot on. The president, former president, was really focused on both the American dream, the American promise, and also kind of the American challenge. How do we develop a strong economic engine while at the same time protecting our resources for future development? And so that is the tension. That's the tension that we're gathered here to talk about. That's the tension that your governor just mentioned. But they're not mutually exclusive concepts, and I'm happy to say I agree with the governor that you have a president and an administration and a former administrator at EPA and a current administrator at EPA who all believe strongly that energy development and environmental protection are not mutually exclusive concepts. Economic development and environmental protection are not mutually exclusive concepts. In fact, you cannot have a strong environment, you cannot have public health protections that we need to do to drinking water, safe drinking water, surface water, you name it. You can't do that without a strong economy. I don't get paid, working for the Environmental Protection Agency without the taxpayer. We don't get tax revenues without strong American business. As you look back at the history of this country, when we began to really focus on environmental protection in the 70s, and rivers on fire in Ohio and things like that helped drive this, but it was also really at the growth of our economy where we were able to develop laws that transitioned from just simply developing our economy to doing things like worrying about externalities. And so once we have the economic firepower, suddenly you can do things about how do you develop watershed management plans? How do you invest in infrastructure that protects safe drinking water? You need the economic development in order to have the environmental protection. So I wholeheartedly agree with your governor on that, and I thank him for his leadership. So 5 years ago, I ran screaming from Washington, D.C. And I think I was tired of the city. I was tired of the politics. Maybe I was just tired. I had young kids working at a big law firm, and I wasn't really satisfied with the city. I'd gone to D.C. back in the day to learn how the sausage was made, to learn how federal policy was made. My goal was to go work for a couple of years, learn it, and then get out. And that city sort of sucks you in, and I spent well more than a decade learning how the sausage was made. And after a while, and you don't realize it's happening, pretty soon, really the only thing that's on the menu, on the D.C. menu, is the D.C. sausage. So you lose touch with the reality outside that city. And I think I began to grow frustrated with it. And so I was thinking about doing something different with my life. And I was talking to Governor Freudenthal, who's a former governor in Wyoming. He says, look, if you're going to supercharge your career, if you're going to be the actual great attorney that you think you are, and you're not, if you are going to learn about how life actually works, how federal policy translates out at the state level, you got to go work for the state. You got to get out of D.C. You got to go, get out, see how a state actually operates. And so, he invited me out to Wyoming and got me to work for Governor Meade. And I had the honor of working in the Attorney General's office and advising the Department of Environmental Protection or Quality on water quality issues. And it's really interesting that I began my de-education, that I got rid of the sort of the DC-centric view of the world and began to understand how the world really works. And when you see federal policy translated out at the state level, you see how the regulated community actually has to interface with our federal regulations. You really gain a new appreciation for really how complicated this is. But I also gained an appreciation for the passion in the state of Wyoming for the environment, the expertise of the people who worked every day to protect the environment and also ensure that people get their permits to do the things they need to do to keep the economy going. The sophistication with which the regulatory programs were running. And the other thing I learned is also the frustration with the federal government. There are multiple times where I saw it and saw the frustration of the governor's cabinet in working with the federal government, EPA in particular, and having the federal government tell Wyoming how to manage its natural resources without understanding anything about Wyoming's natural resources. And so that frustration in the relationship between the federal and state government was sort of ingrained in me in Wyoming. When I returned home to go to Wisconsin, I saw the same thing. I saw the same passion. It's certainly a different political climate than Wyoming, different culture, but still the same passion for the natural resources, the passion for being outdoors, the passion for how they protect their own resources, the passion for how they want to do their economic development, and also the frustration with the federal government. I learned about the growth of the solicitor's office in state governments. A lot of states over the years, the last 10 years, have formed solicitor's offices. And really why you had the rise of the solicitor's office or the federal litigators in state government is because of the expansion of the power of the executive branch, the power of the administrative state, and the decline of the power of the legislature. And so states began to realize that the only way you can check the power or the overreach of the federal government is to use the courts, the third branch of government, to check the power, because Congress is not necessarily stepping up to the plate. And so states began to be more powerful over the last decade in how they interface with the federal government. And I really learned to see that relationship in Wisconsin, working with their solicitor's office, and actually suing, my current employer. So, I didn't think I'd go back to DC. And quite frankly, I'm thrilled to live in Wisconsin. I still live in Wisconsin. But then the election happened, and I got a phone call. And I saw a new administration who's really interested in talking honestly about the intersection between the economy and the environment, recognizing the tension in how to have both, not just one or the other, interested in sort of rebalancing the relationship between federal and state government. And so I thought about what would I have to offer if I would go back. And I would not do it if I had nothing to offer. And it's more than just knowing a little bit about water, knowing a little bit about environmental policy. But what I really had to offer was understanding that relationship between the federal and state government, understanding how federal policy translates at the state level, and an understanding, sort of an interest in rebalancing that relationship. And so I said yes. I wanted to come into the Office of Water and work on a few big ticket reforms that I think would kind of accomplish those objectives. And so I'm going to cover just a few of the things, a few of the way we're approaching that relationship. And I'll thematically, I could talk about all the rules and the initiatives that we're working on, and it can go on forever, and it would probably bore you silly. But I'm happy to take questions at the end. But thematically, I want to talk about three big ticket things. One is sort of changing the way we do business. We, meaning the federal government. Talk to you a little bit about how we're doing that. The other, thematically, what we're doing is sort of providing regulatory certainty through some of our reg reform initiatives. And so I'll give you some examples of that. And then finally, just getting some respect for kind of local business, local communities, what we can do as a federal government to think more locally, try to solve problems at the local level. So first, changing the way we do business, and that's probably where I spend most of my time within the Office of Water, is working with our folks, amazing career professionals, but trying to get them to think a little bit differently about the relationship between the federal government and states. And so one of it is, we are required to consult with states as we're going through the regulatory process, consult with our tribal partners and local government. I'm trying to change that into engagement, consultation to engagement. And so, examples of how we do that, when we were drafting the WOTUS, the Waters United States, step 2, we've got a bunch of steps, and I'll cover that in a bit. But as we're thinking about how to draft a new regulation that will provide regulatory certainty, another theme that I'll talk about, we asked the Environmental Council of the states to pick 9 or 10 geographically diverse, politically diverse, hydrologically diverse states, come in and sit down and talk for 2 days. Just listen. What do you want us to do? What do you think we should do? Where should the line of jurisdiction between federal and state waters begin and end? I also spent 2 days that same week with our tribal partners. And it was just, listening to a dialogue about what we need to do with our federal regulation. And I had some amazing ideas that came out of that effort, things that I never would have thought about. Was it enough time? Was it enough engagement? Absolutely not. I helicoptered in a year into the rulemaking process, and so, the train had left the station and I was still sort of running to catch up. But that kind of dialogue taught me that the states actually can help us draft regulations. It also taught me that, I think the governor mentioned it, there's no way that you can make everybody happy at all, especially in the Waters United States rule. In fact, if everyone's mildly disappointed, that would be a wild success for me. But so it will be the challenges in that space, and I think the governor was spot on. You can't make everybody happy in the environmental space. There's just too much emotional connection to the issues on both sides. But that sort of engagement with the states really helped me. You'll see it, the conduit, the groundwater connectivity, flow through groundwater. Do you need Clean Water Act permits? Huge issue in this state. When I first took over, within a couple of weeks, we dropped a notice out that said, hey, this is really confusing. The federal government hasn't been necessarily clear in how you should regulate discharges to groundwater. And tell us what you think. We got 55,000 comments. It wasn't an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. We weren't signaling one way or the other which way we're going to go. Just tell us what you think. And what we learned that the agency had positions that it had taken in the past that we had forgotten about. And so as we were filing briefs in federal courts, we weren't necessarily aware of the entire story, the history of the agency. And so it was a really strong educational process for us. I think Charles' team submitted a letter and provided some really interesting insight. And so we take that information, we learn from it, and we'll implement that through some of our regulatory certainty reform initiatives. Also, you'll see it in the perfluorinated compounds discussion that we're having in the drinking water side. We convened a national summit in DC, brought all the experts in, brought our state and tribal partners in, brought some local communities in, and had a dialogue. This is potentially one of the next major issues that we're going to have to grapple with for 10 years in the public health side, the drinking water side, the groundwater contamination side. How do we deal with it? We ask. We ask the experts to help us formulate policy. So again, that's helping us kind of rethink the way we do business. We won't be perfect. It's an institutional cultural shift at the agency. I can't promise it's gonna happen overnight. I can't promise that I'm always gonna be able to reach out, but I can promise that you'll have my commitment to try to do that and to try to reform the way we do business as long as I'm at the agency. The other is that we're trying to think about the way we think about the Fed first mentality. I think you heard the governor talk about it. The last administration and even that, even the administrations before that, there's become kind of a growth in this. The federal government will tell you how to run your business. We will tell you how to regulate your resources as opposed to ask. And so, one example in how I'm kind of trying to change the way we think about the relationship is in nutrients. We have excess nutrient challenges in this country in both our surface water and now it's a drinking water problem. Drinking water systems, unfortunately, Ohio a couple years ago gave us another example about what happens if you get too much algae in surface water. It can shut down a drinking water system. The last administration really came after this as sort of a kind of through the regulatory lens. You need to develop numeric criteria, and you need to develop total maximum daily loads. You need to do this modeling. We're going to tell you how to solve the problem. And I think they lost an opportunity to really learn from the experts, the states, the local communities, the water management districts, the folks, the soil conservation districts, the people who grapple with this at the local level. If you really understand nutrients, it's a local issue, and the local solutions are going to be the way we have to grapple with this. And so I hired a deputy assistant administrator for the Office of Water, Anna Wildeman, whose job it is to go out right now and listen to the states, listen to the regulated community, work with agriculture as opposed to aim at agriculture. Understand, that if you're going to ask agriculture to help us solve a problem, you have to think like them through a business lens. Understand their business, understand what drives agriculture, and with them, they can become a partner as opposed to a target. And so we're really trying to focus this, maybe the Office of Water and Nutrient Space, maybe I'm just a convener. Maybe I don't regulate the solution. We have all the above tools, but that's one example of where we really are sort of reframing the way we look at big ticket problems for this country and trying to work with our states and partners to solve a problem that I think more energy needs to happen. Kentucky serves on the Hypoxia Task Force for the Gulf of Mexico. It's a really interesting federal model that each state is approaching nutrient management differently. And within my first week on the job, I had a Hypoxia Task Force meeting. And it was an instantaneous education about how really creative the states are at solving problems. And so it was kind of formulated my strategy from day one through random luck that it was a meeting that I attended like the second day I was there. So the other area, so regulatory certainty. You'll hear this a lot. Administrator Pruitt certainly made this an initiative, talked about cooperative federalism. Administrator Wheeler actually looks at it with a slightly different lens. He still believes strongly in cooperative federalism, that's for sure. But he likes to talk about it in terms of regulatory certainty. What can the federal government do to help states, help the regulated community understand the regulatory framework in which they operate? When you're making investments in your mines or in your manufacturing facilities or in your energy facilities, whatever the case may be, having represented people who have to go after permits, we understand that investment uncertainty creates project uncertainty. Regulatory uncertainty means that equity might not flow into a project and you might not be able to get your projects up and running. And so what can we do to provide better certainty, better regulatory certainty for the regulated community? And so part of our reg reform initiatives really are focused on the regulatory certainty component. So Waters United States is one. That has been a gift that's been given for 40 years. Only lawyers have really enjoyed the Waters United States debate. You know, we are allowing major federal jurisdictional decisions in this country to be driven by the courts, not by the elected officials who are tasked with solving these big ticket problems. I think over the years, the federal government has crossed the line, to be quite frank. There are limits set up in the Clean Water Act, constitutional limitations, federal, balance of power between state and federal government. And I think we have lost sight over, whether or not it's because we care deeply about the environment and the ends justify the means, and we can regulate wherever there's a drop of water. There's probably some legitimate rationale for where the last administration went. But I do think that, we have 4 courts already that have weighed in and said, you know what, the 2015 rule probably crossed the line. And so I'm the lucky guy who gets to try to rewrite that reg and provide better regulatory certainty. And I'm coming at it purely from what is our framework, what are the limitations under the Constitution, limitations that Congress imposed on me in the Clean Water Act, and how can I provide a regulation and a definition that everyone knows is the answer? I'm trying to get rid of the subjective interpretation of what is a federal or a state water. And so all of our energy is drafting a regulation that puts down very clear guidelines. And my long-term goal, my long-term hope, maybe it's aspirational, but I am going to ask the states over time to help us map the federal waters versus the state's waters. And so you'll have on a map, 5, 10 years from now, a kind of a clear delineation of where we think jurisdiction begins and ends. So if you're a farmer, you don't have to worry about a federal regulator walking the back 40 and doing things like significant nexus tests and some subjective tests that may or may not be a water United States and have to spend a couple $100,000 hiring consultants to help you figure that out. That's the goal, that's the aspiration, that's the clarity that we're looking for. Can I get there? I don't know. We're trying. We're certainly working as hard as we possibly can and as quickly as we possibly can because we know it's important. We know it's important for the states. Kentucky has been really engaged in this debate for the last several years and have provided really valuable information and contributions into our administrative record to help us think about these issues. The other area, for example, is conduit. I mentioned it earlier. I mean, obviously that's a big ticket issue for the state. When I started my job 9 months ago, it was confusing. The landscape has even shifted more dramatically than I ever would have expected. 2 or 3 Court of Appeals cases that have come out at odds with each other. I think it's more likely than not that the Supreme Court will take this issue up and hopefully provide guidance. Better guidance than I got in the Waters United States context. That's all I'm praying for. I don't need the court to give me a 4-4-1 decision. But I do think the Supreme Court will probably weigh in on this issue. But for the federal government, it is now clear to me, based on the 55,000 comments that we got, that we need to do a better job taking and stating a position that the federal government will stand behind to provide the regulatory clarity and certainty. And so I think you will see in the future the Office of Water doing that. So we're still analyzing the comments, still formulating our strategy. But that is an area that has become painfully obvious to me that we need to provide that clear regulatory certainty so that states, regulated entities can run your business with clarity. I guess I'll talk a little bit about some of our focus on community needs. In fact, I want to talk about Kentucky. We talk about, at least in our drinking water world, we love, and actually, I'm going to pause for a moment. The governor was right. We have made amazing progress. If you look at where we were 30, 40, 50 years ago to where we are now, the number of drinking water systems and the level of population in this country that has access to safe, healthy drinking water, it's amazing. We've made amazing progress, but it doesn't mean we don't have more work to do. And one of those is in the drinking water space. The Office of Water used to measure performance and congratulate itself. Say, hey, 92% of our population is served by drinking water systems that provide safe, reliable water within all the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the regulations that we have imposed. But what that statistic forgot is that there are 3,500 drinking water communities, or drinking water systems right now that are out of compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that is unacceptable. And so by us, and I've been working with Henry Darwin, who we stole from the state of Arizona, really changing the way we look at our performance metrics as an agency. Rather than celebrate the success, 92% of the people have access to safe drinking water, I want to focus on the ones that don't. You know, the 3,500 communities that need our help. And so our goal for the next couple of years is to get that down to 2,700 communities, and how to work with our regional offices and our state partners to do that. And so the drinking water community, the intersection of the people who are out in rural America or urban America who rely on us to provide safe drinking water at the tap, I think we can do better, and so we're focused on that. In the drinking water space, I also want to commend Kentucky for really focusing on an area that is really challenging, which is you have a lot of community drinking water systems. And we have challenges with the retirement profile, the age of the workforce, you know, the technology that's available, and not enough money to help these systems operate effectively. And so the state of Kentucky worked to try to consolidate through regionalization the number of drinking water systems down to a more manageable number. That is really hard to do. It's not for everybody, but it's an effective strategy that I think helps us focus our resources in to provide better safe drinking water to our constituents. That was not EPA forced effort. That was not a mandate. That was good government. That's what worked for Kentucky. That's what worked for your communities, and I commend you for it. What I'm now trying to figure out is how do I learn from that model and try to replicate it in other parts of the country. And so that's this cooperative federalism, which is, you know, the states really do know what they're doing. We should trust the states to help us help others. And so that's an example of where we're learning and trying to replicate. And also, as part of that conversation, it's become more clear to me, you know, we talk about, one of my primary initiatives coming into the Office of Water is to focus on aging infrastructure, our capital needs. You know, we have $750 billion of capital infrastructure needs, both on the water and wastewater side. That is a crazy number just to get back to baseline. I'm worried that number will get worse, not better, because as we have, you know, the continued urbanization in this country, rural to bigger cities, we're spending our money on capital capacity development, not necessarily dealing with aging infrastructure. And so I came in thinking about the capital side of our aging infrastructure, and I'm starting to realize that I have to really focus on the human capital side as well. So when you're dealing with a small rural community like in Kentucky or in Wyoming or Wisconsin, I've been asked to prosecute small wastewater or drinking water systems with 500 people, that serves 500 people, and, you know, Bob retired, and they're now out of compliance with their federal or state standards. You know, what am I to do? You know, you can't just bring in a certified operator who wants to live in a community. And so we have human capital needs in the wastewater, drinking water space that is probably going to create a crisis mode sooner than later. And so I'm really spending my time trying to figure out how do we do workforce development. You know, work with our states to find, you know, do we need to train people at trade schools? Do we need to work at high school education level? Do we need to find ways to incentivize training programs, certification programs, but really trying to figure out sort of the human capital side of what we do for a living. And that's become a major priority for the Office of Water. So again, that's an example, and I've got a list in my office that's called my heart attack list. Every time I look at it, I have a heart attack. I've got 40 major initiatives. You know, half are big ticket regs, half are major federal initiatives, half are kind of reframing the way my office operates. And every time I look at it, I collapse and want to run screaming from the city again. But really what drives me and what kind of comes back to the base is, so the legacy things that we can do as this administration is reframe the way we do business. I want speeches like the governor just gave, thanking the federal government for listening and changing and working with the states as opposed to against the states. That is a measure of success. I want to try to institutionalize that so that we don't have to have the surprise and the happiness and the wonder of a governor talking about the relationship. That should be business as usual. And so those are the things that I will focus on in my tenure. But I'm happy now because I haven't covered some of the specific laundry lists. And I think, by the way, I'm on a panel later to talk 404 reform. And so we'll talk Clean Water Act 404 mitigation issues later, in probably an hour or so. But do people have questions now that you want me to cover that I haven't covered now? I'm not the governor, so you don't have to feel obligated to ask me questions. But if you do, or otherwise, I'm happy to kind of go out in the hallway and answer questions as they may come up. But if there aren't any questions, I think I'll end my remarks now and see how we're doing on schedule. So, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, what I'd suggest is see, we were supposed to start the panel at 2:15, it's 2:35, so how about we take a 10-minute break and be back at a quarter till. That'll put us, we'll start out 30 minutes behind, but I think we'll be okay. Sorry. Thanks.